Hello to our faithful viewers out there. I am Finn Bell, poet and podcaster from the San Francisco Bay Area, and you are here with us at the Poets Lighthouse. Joining us today in our virtual studio, poet Catherine Candano, joining us from Singapore. Catherine's writing has been published in the Asia Literary Review, Literature in North Queensland, Asian Cha, as well as Philippine literary anthologies and journals such as The Crowns and Oranges, New Philippine Poetry at Home in Unhomeliness, an anthology of new Philippine postcolonial poetry in English, IYAS, A Decade of Philippine Writing, and Ani. She received full writing fellowships in the Philippines from Silliman University, University of the Philippines, Ateneo de Manila University, De La Salle University, the University of Santo Tomas, and the University of Southern Indiana. She has received the National Achievement Awards for Arts and Culture from the National University of Singapore and the Loyola School Awards for Arts at the Ateneo de Manila University. She is active with the Poetry Festival Singapore annually and is part of a community of Singaporean and Filipino writers celebrating cross-cultural inclusion. She is part of Ethos Books Get Lucky, an anthology of Philippine and Singapore writings, which was launched at the 2015 Singapore International Writers Festival and reviewed in the newspaper of records of the Philippines, philstar.com. Kathy, we want to welcome you to the Poets Lighthouse today.
I am so excited to be here, Finville. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So wonderful for you to join us. I know it's earlier in the Philippines in the morning. Hopefully, you had, your coffee and are perked up today. I wanted to go ahead and get into my first question with you. Would you perhaps be able to tell us a little bit more about how and when your poetry journey began?
Wow. Definitely, it started with really, really kind teachers, literature teachers, who took me aside and said, you can borrow any book in the library that you would like, because every book in the library is accessible and a way to understand a little bit more about the world. And
Mhm.
I remember at the time, there were weird rules when you were, an 8-year-old and
Yeah.
told you cannot go to the big grown-up section of a library. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, Finbel, but I was told when I was 8 that there are parts of the library that are not allowed for folks who are curious. And
Wow.
I had teachers who said, no, 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 it's going to be okay. And I remember very vividly, I had to get a letter saying, this young lady would like to go into that section of the library and read Shakespeare or read Emily Dickinson. And I was just really curious, and I was
Yeah.
very much welcomed for my curiosity. And those teachers, they really made the difference.
That is, I love that. That's a charming story. I got in trouble for wanting to check out more than 10 books at a time. I wanted to do that. I would, like
Mm.
return them. They said, "Oh, you're here it's just been the following day. You read all 10 books already." I'm like, "Yes, can I have some more, please?" And they're like, "Okay, we have to put a limit on this child." So they figured out a separate set of rules for me. But they allowed me to come back and get more than 10 books. I think they liked it because, it was kind of shaking the dust out of some books that have not been read in a long time. And yes, I try to very slyly get into the adult section because reading, things like, oh my goodness, what did we have available? We had like really um, younger level books and none of the really great ones like, the Little Prince available. I don't know what kind of libraries were available to me in those little naval-based libraries. There you go. So what was available was what we had.
I love that they gave you that exception and they acknowledge
Yes.
that it
Yes.
is a good thing to want to voraciously read, and
Exactly.
that we should celebrate that.
And there are definitely, thankful for that happening, that there are teachers. There's always that one or two teachers in your elementary school life that they're like, oh my goodness, this is a child that, that's really into reading, is into like the same things that they were when they were younger, that got them, into teaching, or into like um, being English professors, or like just avid readers to begin with. So they try to nurture you. There's one or two of those that kind of stand up for you, for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes.
I remember one of the times that they would they normally give you a list, right, of
Hmm.
things that you should cover and read. And it's a list that is, the great classics, or it's the must
Hmm.
know, right? And I remember I was done with the ones that they assigned. And then I said,
Yes.
can I still be assigned something else that I'm really curious about? This author, this book. And then they would say, yeah, sure. If you want to take on the extra burden of reading, I was like, yeah, yes, please sign me up for that. I would love that reason to go out there and discover this. So I remember I could append book lists because very kind teacher said, yes, I will give you extra credit if you really want to take on that homework. So to me, the joy of reading and the joy of discovery were so much nurtured by really kind, generous, and understanding teachers, such that I really thought that teaching literature was a very important role that I
Hmm.
contribute to. It's my first job actually out of university.
Oh,
Is
was it?
to go back to the English department, and I taught the fiction classes and poetry classes that I just graduated from as a fresh graduate from university.
I can definitely see that. I don't see that as much of a surprise. It seemed like the natural progression for you. So after our break, dear listeners, we will learn a little bit more about our wonderful guest. And with us, we have Singapore based Filipino poet, Catherine Candano. Catherine, I always very much look forward to this part of our program. This is when we have the pleasure of hearing our guest poet share some of their very favorite pieces with us. So I understand that you brought two pieces to share, and they are called Imaginary Landscape to Novina and Tonight I Disappeared. We would be so honored and thrilled if you would share those two pieces with us tonight.
My pleasure. So the first piece Finn Bell has mentioned that I'd like to read for everyone is called Imaginary Landscapes to Novina. It is published in an anthology in Singapore by Ethos Books called Get Lucky. And what I'm really excited about is it's a chance for me to take you a bit on a journey of what the Filipino diaspora in Singapore is like, and why it's really important for us, this concept of pilgrimage and journey as part of our life here in Singapore. So, the piece I want to read for you today also talks a little bit about the special spots in Singapore that are unique to housing or caring for the Filipino community. And that spot is called Novina. It's a train station stop, but it's also a spiritual home. It houses a magnificent Catholic church that is a weekly haunt for a lot of Filipinos to find solace living so far away in Singapore. So let me share that with you. Imaginary landscapes to Novena. The skein flew and the women prayed for touchdown at wingtip, a city canvas we expected in scaffolding. Variations on canvas. Number 1. If Luz were on the train, it would be a dark, roaring tune, and a single handrail we held as firmly as a child's slim arm. Another deft hand moves in wordless finger exercises on each rosary bead and stop to Novina. The next piece I'm excited to share with you also takes on the theme of journey. Pilgrimage is one type of journey, but movement towards opportunity and economic migrants are also a type of journey. This poem is called Tonight I Disappeared, and it highlights a particular treasure that in tropical food culture, Philippines is very much synonymous with bananas. But what's interesting is for those who are very aware of the richness of what the whole plant can provide, people will also know that it's not just the yellow fruit you see in the supermarket that is prized in our cuisine. It also includes parts of value that are quite hidden, such as the blossoms of the banana tree, the plant and its innermost hearts. It's used in a lot of savory dishes, and it's the kind of flavor that it's quite hard to migrate. But I think economic migrants traveling as part of the diaspora to a new life, they try their best to hold on to that inner heart of where they came from. And this poem is about that. It's called Tonight I Disappeared. Tonight I disappeared with a forest of banana blossoms and its leafy covering tucked into my suitcase. At first, I doubted its carrying capacity, so I took the necessary pain to keep its tear-shaped leaves intact. Upon crossing, I sectioned each shy maroon crown from touching the others. I wanted to preserve the memory of its habitat inside the suitcase. The equidistant, thick fronds of green, unripe bananas hanging gently for the harvest. With some effort, I managed to coax the zippers to close against a collective girth of bowls. I swaddled its thickened roots with wet newspaper and ever so gently wrung out the water it held until the letter smeared ink on each leaf and blossom, the headlines of the day from Manila. I folded a layer of silt and soiled bedding to hold each stem, each palm upright, and to cushion what I imagined were its most tender hearts. In my new home, the innermost heart of a nascent banana would take the center stage, waiting to be served at the table, with no one the wiser of its perilous pilgrim's flight.
That
Takes me back to a memory of being on a plane, Finbel. And it's been a while since we have traveled in a plane to an airport between different countries. So it was lovely to share these stories of travel with you.
it did certainly leave me with this sense of longing and a nostalgia and a memory that is kind of, if this makes any sense, half hidden at this moment, but it's emerging. So in your first poem, Imaginary Landscape to Novina, The image that first crossed my mind, the sensation really upon reading this, was my first time being back in the US after 8 years. It was very surreal. And in this poem, I felt a touch of that surreal just outside of my consciousness. But I also felt this reality and comfort brought about by something that is familiar and tangible. And for me here in this poem, it was the presence um, of those rosary beads. Do you hope to connect with and call forth a similar type of peaceful feeling in your readers when they see these images, when they see these images on the page in your poetry?
I think when you think about the diaspora, it is a very disruptive movement of uprooting yourself, moving to a new place, starting again from scratch,
Mm-hmm.
and having that lack of familiarity. And so the first concept of care that you would seek for and have solace in is familiar internal milestones and guideposts.
Yes.
And for Filipinos, it's specific symbols that are very familiar. For spirituality, a lot of Filipinos have Christian faith, and that is typically a place that you would gather, connect, but also it's a spiritual place that can house all. So it's a very open home, essentially.
Yes.
Whether that church or that spiritual home is in Singapore or in the US or in Manila, it is bringing you back to that home. So that's mentoring you. The second one is care. I think Filipinos are very much about the care they express to others. And so caregiving, connection, touch, the images of touching the rosary bead, touching the child that they're caring for, these are all very familiar to me in my cultural inner life. And
Mhm.
so I try to really bring those two elements together of that inner world, bringing it out. Sometimes when there's so much changing around you, especially
Yes.
if you bring yourself to a new place, the best place to go is inside, right?
Yes, exactly. So like that's great, the way that you phrase that. It kind of makes a haven or a touch point that you create and you carry with you to wherever you go. That's very powerful. Um, Thank you for that. That was actually helpful for me in um, going through that experience, reliving that experience, reading that poem, and reading the next one as well, which was "Tonight I Disappeared," the second one that you shared with us. In this poem, I felt very much like, especially during the closing stanza, you said in there, "With no one the wiser of its perilous pilgrim's flight." There was that intensity of the desire to preserve yourself that I felt, preserve this identity amidst um, forces surrounding you, be it a new location, a different culture, that kind of forces you to shed what you otherwise would be able to maintain in a familiar setting. Can you please tell us about many of these touching symbolisms that were present um, in that poem? In particular, you're talking about not just like a lot of cultures just know the banana as the usable part of it. And I even put while you were saying, I was putting in our comments about the puso ng saging. I was introduced to that when we moved to the Philippines when I was little, and that very much became, no pun intended, the heart of what we would have as a meal, along with the ubiquitous rice. is the puso ng saging, the banana blossom. So if you can talk a little bit more about using this as your symbolism.
I think first, the concept of home is a very, very tenuous dynamic for a diaspora. And
Yes.
you are a member of the diaspora, I am, and we're on opposite sides of the world, but we have this dynamic where I think it's a spectrum of closest to origin and setting up this new I would say a new reimagining of your home,
Mm-hmm.
but still that fabric across, it's still intact.
Yes.
Food is one of those uh, expressions of care, and I will never cease to keep saying it. Care is such an important part of being a Filipino, because care is expressed tangibly through how much thoughtfulness, how much preparation, and how much anticipation of people's needs are in that space, the attention. And what's interesting is the more that you look at food that is rather invisible because it needs preparation, it's difficult to source this material,
Mm-hmm.
it highly it expires too quickly because it's very perishable.
Yes.
All of this means you need a little bit more delicacy and care and thoughtfulness behind it to preserve it, to make sure it's expressed in the best state. And I think the heart of the banana, plant, it is one of those things that if you are not from that culture, it is really hard to explain. While you would go into the, what is not the fruit of the tree and basically identify a really, really powerful metaphor for literally both and figuratively its heart, the heart of
Mm-hmm.
that plant. And in Southeast Asia, I've realized that there are these similarities of using this type of ingredient, but in Philippine culture, we would use it with a very interesting combination of um, tribe and nuts, and it would become something called kare kare.
Mm-hmm.
This is very, Hispanic, and it's Malay and Filipino all together. And to me, just knowing with your eye that there is a hidden value to this very unassuming ingredient and unraveling it for the person that you're giving it to, it's also about expressing that connection to home and that care. So to me, there is that spectrum that we are always navigating. And
Mm-hmm.
in a way, losing that touch with that origin because you're unfamiliar with the ingredient. Imagine if you gave someone who has never seen this strange purplish
Yes.
ingredient, would you know what to do with it? Would you know how to prepare it and bring it out the best of it on a dinner table? And these are just some expressions of that navigation of your sense of self and in a way being connected despite being far away. And that's to me the most unique part about being a diaspora in the Philippine
Yes.
global community is you are so far, true, borders are shut, true, travel not possible, true, but we still connect, and that connection is very, very, very tangible because of the culture. So in a way,
Absolutely.
your home is still with you. It's just you're not around it, surrounded it. It's coming from within outward.
That's true. That's so true. And what you said called to mind for me a lot of the fact of wherever you are, even if they are not related to you, you end up having something of a de facto Filipino community family, which say for example in certain parts of your in certain times of your life when you're a teenager, when you're younger, you don't understand and you want to be as away from that as possible and move into something that is outside of the Filipino culture, the Asian culture. And then as you get older, you come back to that realization of how your elders were trying to connect with you through food, how it was their language to keep you um, invested in this rich history, teaching you these things that you otherwise would have shucked off. I don't have time to do that. They were passing on this thing that was a tangible example or remembrance of something that was very dear to them and something that connected them to home. So it's their connection to home that they pass on to you, and that's a beautiful thing that I guess you have to kind of learn or connect to yourself, if you are able, and it's all the more special to do so, and better to do so in the company of people who are able to teach you. So that community is really important.
I think the agency, Finn Bell, of someone deciding, how do I want to show up in the
Mhm.
world I'm in, it definitely will take them on that spectrum, right? And it's a
Yes.
discovery. And maybe they are running away from it to discover the bounds by which they are surrounded. Maybe they're running towards it because they see something very, very curious. It's like a book you haven't opened and you just want to understand and read those stories, read those, lived experiences that others have shared, but experience it yourself and imbibe that. And I think that's the exciting thing about living across the globe, but still being Filipino, is there is still that
I
dynamic,
agree.
and that is global. I'm sure
I agree.
it
Yes.
is not an
Very much
easy
so.
one, but it is a very, very, very real one. It's what makes us unique, I think, our diaspora.
It definitely does, and it is like it's something I cherish very, very much. So I'm thankful for that. Kathy, I feel, looking at all your accomplishments that you've had, like I was in awe looking at your body of work. You have accomplished so much in the poetry community in this very short span of time. What single advice do you feel that you can give to poets who are beginning their journey that would help them to continue to focus their determination and drive in continuing to create and share their poetry with the world?
Only one. Okay. If I were speaking to the younger Kathy, maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would definitely say, don't hesitate to think of yourself as part of a bigger world of people like you trying to navigate the world through letters. I think a poet has definitely that stigma of being in a locked little room and writing your heart out and your pain and your joy and
Mhm.
talking only to that notebook or that paper. But that is not the reality. The reality is there's so many like us, poets like you and me, who are doing that in our own versions of those locked rooms and in our notebooks. But when we remember that the whole world of the writing world is rich and it's intergenerational. We can read work from
Mhm.
people who no longer exist. We can read work that are translated in languages we never learned to speak in. These are all opportunities for us to see that we are actually just going through the same journey of life. Just the expressions are a little bit different. The
Yeah.
food may be different. The flavors are different. But the pain and the joys, they are all the same. And I think that connection is something I wish someone had told me early on
Mm.
that is worth to put energy into,
Yeah.
because it really would have made you feel that you have this shared experience rather than a solitary one.
Yes. So important. I agree. Yeah, that that would have made
Not
a big
alone,
difference.
right?
Yeah,
Yes, yes, you are not alone.
you're not
And
alone.
there are people who still feel alone, I think, writing, and
Hmm.
one needs to let them know that there are communities where they can seek um, similar minded folks that, you know what, have seen a little bit more, lived a little bit more.
Yes,
And that is a lot of comfort that
it
I
definitely
wish
is.
I had 30 years ago.
Yes, and it's definitely a departure from that mindset. Honestly, where poets or writers or creatives in general think that they have to do this as a solitary pursuit. There still is that being pervasive, where they believe that they're creating in this alone and tortured space, but having the community enriches your art, it informs your art. It's this wonderful exchange of energy and um, and teaching that goes both ways. So yeah, definitely that's definitely something that would be useful for a poet or a creative starting to have, to know that they can reach out and there is that community that is available to them.
And I
We
think not
reach.
to underestimate the generosity of
Yes,
people, because
yes.
sometimes when I think about my journey, there are teachers, there are other writers who have taken the time to say, I would love to read your work and give you another pair of eyes. I've
Hmm.
also heard other writers say, the piece that you put together, it made me think about something that I was also considering, and this is my take on it from where I'm coming from. And those conversations have always given me the sense that this journey, while you will still be talking to your notebook and your pen and your paper,
Hmm.
they never have to be solely that. And that gives you a lot of comfort, that sense
Yes,
of continuity with others and their own journey. And I hope that that'll be something that people get reassured that with technology as well, despite being so physically separated from one another, there are even more affordances now to bring us closer together. So I really hope that people realize that compared to 30 years ago, we would
yes,
have to write letters to each other, Binbell, to have this conversation.
yes. And then wait in that waiting process.
Yes, that would
Yeah.
take 2 weeks from the US, definitely to
Yes.
South Asia.
What do I do in the meantime? Yes.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
Having this convenience is a blessing. It obviously has its setbacks, but in that aspect, it is a useful tool, if it's utilized and made available. And yeah, we can definitely, maybe start our own movement. Let's get this going through, the power of connection and Zoom and the internet. Um, we're at the end of our interview, and I wanted to ask you one last question before we end for the night. But I also want to thank you so much. This has been enlightening. You are so easy to talk to. It is like just truly like, like a coffee clatch, and like we've known each other forever, and we're just having this coffee date. So thank you. I want to thank you in advance. But my last question is, so as we all know, the title of this particular show is called The Poets Lighthouse. And the reason for that is because it very much refers to us, all of us being poets, who are beacons that illuminate the world around us more clearly so that others can see it and that they can make their way. Who, Kathy, was the first lighthouse in your poetic life?
That is a tough one to answer, Finbell. Tough because there have been so many, especially my formative years when I was a teenager. And even, like I said, the librarian or the teacher who said, yes, the limits that you think are imposed on where you can go in this library, they no longer hold, and you can go and be free and discover. So I will have to say that there have been, however, communities around me in those various formative stages. And some were in a school setting. There was a community of people publishing, self-publishing, publishing a literary journal, editorial communities. There were also folks who were simulating writing workshops and bringing that format of critique and discussion together. There were also professors who would teach literature, but then on the side, find folks who were like-minded and excited about this field and offer to read or accept to read work. And that is a very, very daunting thing to find communities. But when you do find folks who understand what you are trying to do, which is just to connect, and they are very willing to put time, energy to support your own journey, I think that's probably the best way I could explain my own growth as a poet, is through the generosity of people in my community. And, not being in one place for long, I have lived in many different countries. It doesn't mean the community gets left behind.
Yes.
Right? If I take a flight and I move to Singapore, it doesn't mean I lose touch with the community back in Manila, but it also doesn't preclude from me to discover new communities that are in my new locale. And that is the beauty of a diaspora poet and being in a community that is, in a way, connected through emotion and letters. You can pick up a piece of paper, you can find a book, and you can find the person behind it. Whether you talk to the person in real life like we're doing now, or we have a conversation through writing, that is probably the most powerful beacon that I attribute my own success and my own growth to. And of course, there have been times where it was not easy.
Yes.
I think a poet does have challenges because you really have to be as quiet with yourself and listen to yourself, but be open to those very strong emotions, memories that are maybe there a lot or they're overwhelming. But being part of that community helps bring that catharsis. So helps move those experiences from raw material to a piece that is ready to be shared and enjoyed and learned from by others. So the learning that you can get from a community rather than speaking to yourself in your own mind is really, really compelling. And I think that's what makes being a poet in the world very special.
Yes. Yes, I agree. And the fact that you're carrying, you're keeping the connections from that one community, and when you move, you bring it with you forward. You are definitely, in a way, being that beacon itself and being that lighthouse that's carrying it and connecting and kind of like a signal out. You're sending that signal, and the light goes forward, and it goes backwards as well. So it's connecting those two communities. You become something of the lighthouse in between, the beacon in between. Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you so much, Kathy. You are such a pleasure to talk to. You have, oh my gosh, you are community. You are community. Just everything that you said brings me so much closer to wanting to connect and expand and just grow this global community, especially what we've gained during this time where we were in lockdown. We're closed off from the world, but we also expanded it in a certain way, and that's a very beautiful thing. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank all of our very lovely and very faithful viewers for watching the Poets Lighthouse tonight. Please do check out Get Lucky, an anthology of Philippine and Singapore writings, which Kathy's a part of, by going to ethosbooks.com.sg, and that's Kathy holding it up over there. The actual book, wonderful, yes. Please do get that book. You can also find out more about her writings by going to the University of the Philippines Creative Writing Center's website, where she has an author page. It is called panitikan.ph. That is PANITKAN.ph. Please continue to support all of our PGN programming by subscribing to our YouTube channel, liking and leaving comments for our videos. We do hope you have a calm and rested weekend.